Welcome to the Daily Lie of Omission, where we share the news you won't hear anywhere else. Today we're going to examine the orderly removal and replacement of the Federal Reserve Bank, an issue America will be confronted with during the next coming economic crash. History defines revolution as a governmental bankruptcy, and revolution has occurred twice in America, once in 1776 and again in 1860. In the 1930s, America was not so divided, but today we are. There is no new normal, and it's not really different this time. The backdrop this time finds our rulers have lost the last election, and Trump is not their guy. So they have summoned the soul of Joe McCarthy, like soil to the sorceress, creating the myth of Russiagate to reverse America's constitutional process by using everything they own to get it back. By hammer and tong, they've pursued America from the coast to now, with a few metro outposts. It's like the cavalry come to subdue the red man, as shown here on this presidential election map of blue versus red. The one historic absolute we have is that replacement government of a revolution's second stage never survives. Never. And it really doesn't matter if it was Bernie or Trump, because bankruptcy and the systemic failure is what the latest election was all about. It was a rebellion against our government's systemic failure. And all the king's horses and all the king's men cannot put the financialization of America back together again, nor should it. Should the Trump administration be lost, this will signal the start of the third and most dangerous stage of our revolution, an internal war of attrition. Time when people finally realize they are in a revolution. But by then, it's too late to do anything about it, but there is hope. Long-time listeners know the mantra of elected new Congress's liberty legislation, but now it is new and improved. Today, we only need to pass 2 acts into law. They are acts that stand before Congress today, right now as we speak. One is the REINS Act and has already been passed by the Senate. It will restore the lawmaking powers of Congress away from agencies of the executive branch and effectively end the imperial presidency. A lot of people don't know it, but as you can see from the chart, 90% of the laws created in the United States today do not go through Congress. The next bill is House Bill H.R. 24, and the focus of our report this evening. This House bill proposes an audit of the Federal Reserve Bank's 2010 housing bailout and document the grand theft of billions from an unsuspecting American public on an unimaginable scale. When the American people get wind of exactly what happened, it will be the end of the Fed. It is this financial rape of America that lies at the heart of all corruption. Everything else is secondary because all other problems are caused by the systemic failure of our status state. It survives because our government is structured to accommodate it. It's not that America needs some new revolutionary structure. We simply need to return to the ground America established in 1776, and we must restore our great experiment that once gave the world hope if we are all to survive. Vladimir Lenin said controlling a nation's central bank is 90% of a revolution, and he was exactly right. America was overthrown in 1914 with the Federal Reserve Act, and passing H.R. 24 means taking it back. The question that remains is, how are Congresses to deal with our money as laid forth in paragraph 5, section 8 of Article 1 of our United States Constitution? And so, without further ado, let me introduce you to the American Reserve Bank, or the ARB. The objective of the ARB is to change the policy that governs our nation's money supply out of the hands of 7 FOMC members, individuals not like you and me, but granted a privileged life filtered through the lens of vampire squids, and instead handing its governing and policy over to the quantitative action of all the American people based upon how all we Americans collectively handle our money. Congress is the people's place in our government, and so that power over money must be conducted by the Congress. I know, that sounds scary. Almost as scary as handing it over to 7 FOMC vampire squids, even if some of them look like your grandmother. I'm not proposing an experiment, and this is no fairy tale because such a central bank once operated in 1816 to 1860, during which time the Suffolk Bank, our model America needs to emulate, experienced less than a dozen bank bankruptcies at the same time the rest of America experienced thousands of banks gone belly up. That number would have been all of them had the federal government not stepped in and suspended the Fourth Amendment by suspending laws over contracts, allowing scrip to pay loans instead of gold specie. In doing so, our government destroyed untold private wealth while rewarding the spendthrifts that created the wanton fiat money that caused the economic breakdown in the first place. It's exactly what the Federal Reserve Bank did to enable our too big to fail banks to survive after they wrecked the nation in 2008, and rescuing them so they could finish off America sometime down the line, and that is sooner than you think. The Suffolk Bank was created in 1816 in Boston to ostensibly squeeze outlying banks in Connecticut and Vermont out of business, but in reality, the Suffolk Bank was in response to the congressional charter of the Second U.S. Bank in 1816. America's second experiment with the private central bank, which would soon doom America to the crash of 1819, is exactly why the Boston bankers established the Suffolk Bank, to protect them from the thieves of this new private central bank. Private central banks do not work, at least not for the citizens of the nation upon which the parasitic machinations of a private central bank are allowed to prey. Suffolk Bank is not a hard concept to conceive if you will open your mind to a far better way. The first primary difference between a Suffolk Bank and our current private Federal Reserve Bank is the Suffolk Bank is entirely staffed by accountants instead of the economists we find running the Fed. While economists at the Fed are fixated upon any number of migrating and floaty charts and projections, the accountants have a single mantra: the solvency of its member banks on a mark-to-market accounting basis. Yes, the Suffolk Bank will mean nearly every too-big-to-fail bank is going to either be broken up or fail. But it also means that regional and local banks will once again thrive, following the same thread of decentralization of power away from those few who make decisions for all others and back into the hands of all Americans, which allows independent and impartial market forces to prevail that reflect the quantitative judgment of the American people. The second challenge to a Suffolk banking system is the requirement of moving to a classical gold standard. This is where people's eyes begin to glaze over, and every economist and econ professor begins to turn blue, swallow their tongue, choking in spit, and denigrating any and all adherents to gold as being fools. They say gold is a barbaric relic. Yet in partnership with a Suffolk Bank, gold becomes the natural and sole purveyor and protector of civilization. For a moment, open your mind and forget about gold as a store of value, though it is. But picture an ounce of gold as a yardstick, an atomic second, if you will, a simple but universal tool of measurement, the same today as it will be tomorrow and the day after, the North Star by which we navigate our wealth. And the basis of the means to navigate with our wealth is represented by over 8,000 tons of gold we Americans collectively own, but which is sequestered under the control of the very private Federal Reserve Bank. Now, did I mention the Currency Control Act of 1793 requires crimes against a classical gold standard demands capital punishment? No? Well, it does. The mechanization by which the people control the governing of the nation's money supply is to match the total number of paper currency dollars to the value of each ounce of gold held in the nation's 8,000 plus ton gold reserve. The mechanization by which the people control the governing of the nation's money supply is to match the total number of paper currency dollars to the value of each ounce of gold held in the nation's 8,000 plus ton gold reserve. There is estimated to be a little over $3 trillion in U.S. currency in existence, comprised primarily of $100 bills, and half of this lies outside the borders of the United States. This leaves $1.5 trillion in America, and if matched ounce to ounce, or ounce to dollar, would result in an official classical gold standard conversion of approximately $5,500 per ounce. Now, before you go off screaming this is impossible, and it's not, consider the alternative is a fiat money creation machine operated by 7 FOMC members of the private Central Reserve Bank who came from Ivy League schools, either beholding to or formerly employed by a too-big-to-fail bankster, vampire squid like they have at Goldman Sachs. Yeah, remember the revolution? It's a governmental bankruptcy. That's right. That's why we're here talking about this. So settle down and consider our only way out. The new American Reserve Bank, or ARB as I like to call it, will be owned 2/5 by the Congress, and that portion is not for sale. The remaining stock is to be owned by the public, with no one individual or organization owning more than 1/10 of 1%. The ARB will act as the clearinghouse of all banking transactions, just as the Fed does today. In fact, for almost everyone, almost all the time, our daily interaction with the classical gold standard dollar will be the same as it is today. Only now it will have greater stability, greater value. As wealth, it will be spread more evenly across America. The only difference will be, instead of reading Federal Reserve Bank note on your dollar bills, which means nothing, it will now read ARB Gold Reserve Note, which means something. And that's important because this is how the quantitative action of the American people will regulate the nation's money supply. This is how quantitative regulation works. All banks trade their net worth for a portion of the gold reserve. The point being, a bank cannot use any other reserve to lend from. No government bonds will do it. It must be entirely based upon the value of the gold the bank owns. The rule of thumb is a 5 to 10 times reserves to loan ratio, leaving a lending bank able to weather a 6 to 10% setback and still remain solvent. Should a bank be found below solvency, the ARB accountants will demand an immediate capital call, and if that doesn't come through, they must either close the bank or they must close the bank and sell its assets. This results in the shareholders of the bank paying greater attention to its lending practices, as well as its depositors. Consequently, bank management toes the line. This results in fewer insolvent banks and a much more secure financial system. However, should lenders get risky or risk becomes systemic, the people can exchange their electronic deposits for cash. And if they get real uncomfortable, their paper dollars for gold in 1 ounce or higher coinage. This reduces the reserve a bank owns, which simultaneously serves, remember, as the metric of solvency. And this is where the unique nature of gold as a universal standard or monetary yardstick shines. You see, gold does not pay interest, nor does currency. So if a bank finds its reserves are becoming insufficient to support their loan portfolio, they offer a higher rate of return, sufficient to attract deposits of dollars or gold in order to remain solvent. Higher rates of return also mean a higher rate of interest on loans, causing loan demand to waver and spending and consumption to drop into decline. This drop in consumption causes obsolete or poorly run businesses to liquidate, freeing up capital for new investment and new jobs, opening up new opportunities that can afford higher rates and begin to grow. As rates subside because too much money is coming in the door, chasing a higher rate of return, the cycle of expansion and contraction of money in the economy is maintained by the quantitative monetary action of every man, woman, and child in America. It's a far better system than when one ruled by 7 minds beholding to fewer still pulling strings behind the scenes. In fact, it's our only other choice besides the one that is killing all of us in America today. Now, there are always details. $1.5 trillion has to be printed in exchange, while offshore dollars are kept out of the country. Violations will have to be draconian, keeping in mind the U.S. Currency Control Act of 1793. And should any nation interfere with our gold standard and currency, that is an act of war. But the action of replacing the Fed with the ARB would be no different than how a bank is closed today. The bank closes at 4:30 on Friday and opens back up with a different management on Monday at 8 a.m. Done all the time. Internationally, the effect upon the dollar's value will be buoyed and force all other nations' currencies to follow suit. And gold, priced in dollars, will become the de facto benchmark against all their currencies. This will end the threat of globalism and the cyber special drawing rights, which is in place and poised to replace the dollar with greater fiat decline and unjust rule of elites. This will end the corrosive effect of devaluating fiat currencies upon world trade, restoring stability to all currencies and worldwide trade. It is a proven monetary system of decentralization, and given the realities of today, our only choice is between this proposed heaven against the realities of our current hell. Washington's farewell address to the nation at its midpoint turned to a dire warning to never allow our power of Congress to be, in Washington's parlance of the time, a public or private agency to usurp any power of Congress. Because as Washington warned, such a power will always end up in the hands of cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men, and that this is the customary weapon by which free governments are destroyed. Cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men. That's the 18th century definition of a sociopath. And what's the worst sociopath in society? Which group? Think a little bit. Or a sociopath is someone that has no empathy for human beings. Give up? Pedophiles. Pedophiles have no empathy for a child. That has got to be the lowest piece of crap on the planet. And that's who inhabits our government today. It's a lot more prevalent than you might think. People like Denny Hastert, that's just the tip of the iceberg. That's not an exception. Henry Ford warned against the Federal Reserve Bank, as did Presidents Wilson, McKinley, and JFK. But most telling is this quote from Isaiah Stamp, chairman of the Central Bank of England in the 1920s. You'll bear with me just here a brief moment. And an extra moment. It's off my book, my second book, Science of Liberty, American Reformation. Banking was conceived in inequity and was born in sin. The bankers own the earth. Take it away from them, but leave them the power to create money. And with the flick of a pen, they will create enough deposits to buy it back again. However, take away from them the power to create money, and all the great fortunes like mine will disappear. And they ought to disappear. For this would be a happier and better world to live in. But if you wish to remain the slaves of bankers and pay the cost of your own slavery, let them continue to create money. That's Isaiah Stamp, Bank of England's chairman in the 1920s. I'd like to share with you how long Monsanto glyphosate has been poisoning America's wheat crop, as reported here in the Healthy Home Economist. Just before harvest, since the early 1980s, when it was discovered if you sprayed a mature wheat field with glyphosate, it would kill the green pockets, forcing the plants into survival mode and force them to rush all nutrients to the grain, increasing yields and making uniform the fields for harvest through their combines by eliminating the unripe areas of the field. In truth, it is not gluten in wheat America has become allergic to, but glyphosate, which contaminates even the Cheerios we feed small children with 1,250 parts per billion. Noting fish contract liver cancer when glyphosate invades their water at 10 parts per billion. We have been feeding Americans, from children on up, poison through bread, spaghetti, cereal, and treats for almost 40 years. Allegations of cancer-causing glyphosate, which is Roundup, is kind of a red herring, though it undoubtedly spreads leukemia and cancer. But what is not spoken of is glyphosate's role in obesity, cardiovascular disease, strokes, heart attacks, Alzheimer's, and the big A, autism. Now glyphosate has been combined with 2,4-D because weeds have grown immune to glyphosate. Monsanto's poisonous Roundup threatens to expand from inflicting 1 in every 49 males born in America with autism today to 1 in every 2 newborns. 50%, 1/2 of all newborn males by the year 2025. That's only 8 years away. Imagine every other male born in America, born as a ward of the state, a future ward of the state. Forget about the cost to institutionalize them all. Consider the nation's ability to produce sufficient able-bodied Americans to occupy the jobs that must be done. If this doesn't destroy America, nothing will. But this will destroy America. And now you know about it too. There is no going back, America. We are locked into a massive systemic failure, and the only answer is to change our entire operating system of government and money. You can subscribe to these broadcasts by clicking on the blue button shown here on this YouTube screen on the page you're viewing right now, or type in WMW Faywell. You can also go to the Elect a New Congress Facebook page to read the Daily Lie of Omission. I post throughout the day with important news you would otherwise miss. It's something I'd like to broadcast daily, but that takes more time and money. Remember, you can read about the science of liberty and liberty legislation for free at scienceofliberty.us, and you could read the script of this broadcast at electanewcongress.com. If you'd like to help create a competitive challenge in our revolution and make America great again, along with Elect a New Congress, you can write me at bill@electanewcongress.com. Thanks for watching. I'm your host, William W. Faywell. Surf's up, America.